Hello, and welcome to Finale to Dorico, Conquering the Transition. My name is Jason Lafredo, and I'll be your guide today as we explore how adding items in Dorico's write mode differs from adding items in Finale. In part 2 today, we're mainly focusing on entering all kinds of markings aside from notes, rhythms, slurs, and articulations. So we know in Finale there's sort of two different ways to add something. So if I'm in the expression tool, I can double click and then I get the expression selection dialog box, and I can literally choose whatever it is that I need and hit assign, and it will get added. But there's also a system of meta keys where you hold down a letter or a number and just click there, right? It's kind of similar in Dorico, except that we do have the tools on the right side in the write mode, and Dorico calls these panels, but we also have a shortcut method which Dorico calls popovers. And the mechanisms for how this works is slightly different than Finale, but the concept is the same. In one way, you can actually just go in here and click in items with your mouse. In the other way, you would use the computer keyboard to make that process a little bit quicker. So as I mentioned in an earlier video, you have all these tools, but they're kind of organized a little bit differently. But again, it's the same idea as the tools in Finale. We do have a clef tool, and when you select that, you will see the clefs that are available to you and the octave lines as well. And I know that in this piece, this viola part switches to treble clef. So the way that this works in the panels is that if I select something and then click what I want, in this case the treble clef, it's going to add that treble clef at that spot. The other way to do this is if you don't have anything selected yet, press the item that you want, it will highlight, and then your cursor will turn into sort of a version of that, and then you can kind of click it in where you need to. That's one way of doing it. There are certain items in Dorico, and the clefs is one of them, where they are range bound. So if you select a range of notes and choose that treble clef, it will revert back to the alto clef at the next spot. Not all of the items in the panels are range bound like that, but some of them are, and the clefs is one of them. So that's how you would add things from the panel, but you can also use what Dorico calls popovers. And the way that the popovers work is that you select something and you press Shift plus a letter, in this case Shift plus C, to get the clefs popover, and it's literally this little window that pops over the selection, and it allows you to use the computer keyboard to type something that you want. In this case, I want a treble clef, so all I have to do is type treble and press return, and it will change to a treble clef. Now the popovers themselves, they're pretty logical for the most part. C for clefs, K for key signatures, M for meter, T for tempos, D for dynamics, etc. I'll put the list up here so you can see all of them. Some of them like Shift Q for chords because C was already taken up for clefs, but they're pretty easy to memorize, and you'll kind of get the hang of this fairly quickly. Of course, you can always go into the panels if you don't remember it, but the language in the popovers themselves tend to be either logical or shortcuts of the logic. And in this case, you can type treble, but that's a lot of letters, but you can also just type the letter G and press return, and you'll get the G clef where you would expect it. For the alto clef, if I want to go back and add the alto clef here, Shift C, I can type alto, 4 letters is not too bad, or I can type Shift C, C clef, A for alto, so that's 2 letters, C, A, right? And there is sort of like this logic to the shortcuts that's being used. You'll kind of learn it eventually. For certain popovers that are common, you'll learn them pretty quickly. But really the best way to learn these is to make sure that you have the Dorico popover reference guide, which I will link to in the description. And this is sort of the be-all and end-all for the popovers, and it will tell you exactly what you need. And there's a great table of contents, so you can go here and choose the clefs and octave lines popovers, and you'll see exactly how to use this. The type of clef on the left, the G clef, and these are all the possible ways that you can enter it. G, G2, sol, or treble to get the treble clef. CA, C3, UT3, or alto to get the alto clef. And there's a lot of other things. I mean, some of the logic here does make sense. It's just you kind of have to know what it is. And there's just a lot you can learn. Of course, you don't have to memorize all of this because you always have access to everything in the panels on the right. So I think what you'll find yourself doing is you'll memorize the common things that you're going to use, and then for the slightly more uncommon things, you'll be aware that you can always go into the panels, and if you really need to add an archaic clef, you can just choose it from here, right? So that's basically the concept of how this works. Now there is 2 modes to this right panel here. There is panel mode, which is this button here, and this does exactly that. When you open one of these, it opens the panel for you. But the second option here, this is popover mode, and it changes the function of these buttons on the right. And actually there's a few extra ones that get added. These extra ones are popovers that don't have panel equivalents. And when you have it in this mode, then selecting a note and selecting something here doesn't give you the panels on the right. It actually just gives you the popovers. So technically, you don't even need to memorize the popover shortcuts with the shift and the letter keys, right? You can just do it this way. Although I think once you learn the popover shortcuts, there's really no reason to ever be in this mode. So I would suggest keeping yourself in panel mode for the majority of the time. So that's Clefs, and as I mentioned before, the octave lines are also part of the Clefs tool. I'll just sort of briefly go through a lot of these just so you can see how this works. The next one is the key signature panel, and again, when you select this, some of these have nifty little functions in them. Like in this one, you have the key signature. There's a little spin box, which is actually very similar to how Finale changes keys in the key signature tool in Finale. So you can actually do this, and if you want to change the key this way, find the key that you need to be in. In this case, it's F, and just click that button, and F will get added. So there's a little bit of flexibility here in how you do this. For the popover, for the key signature, it's going to be Shift K. And the way this one works is the capital letters are going to be major keys. Lowercase letters, Shift K, lowercase f is going to be minor keys. You can also type other things here like 3S to get 3 sharps, 4F to get 4 flats, etc. So the other thing that I'm going to mention about this particular tool, actually let me put this in F because this is actually how it's supposed to be in this piece, is that in this particular popover, you have this icon here, which is like a little shadow person. If you select that, then when you add the key signature, let's say G major, it's going to add that key signature only for that staff. So this allows you to have an independent key signature on this staff versus the others. The other way that you can do this, Shift K, type G, and hold down Option, and you'll see that it will get highlighted and unhighlighted as you hold and depress the Option key, and then just press Return with that held down, and it will also do the same thing. Now, some of the popovers have this icon, some of them don't. It really just depends on the popover and whether or not it's relevant that it could be different on that staff versus a different staff. So just look out for that icon in these popovers. The next tool in the panel here is the meter popover. It's not time signatures, it's meters, and it has the popover shortcut Shift M. And again, it works the same way. You can select something here and choose the meter. This has this create time signature section, which is really kind of neat, and it allows you to add interchangeable time signatures, aggregate alternating time signatures. I kind of recommend that you explore this and see how these work exactly. But again, you can just type in the popovers, right? So Shift M for the meter popover. If I want 3/4, I just type 3/4 and I get that. If I want 6/8, just like that. There's a lot of other stuff you can do in the popovers. If I wanted a irregular time signature, I could do that as well. If I type 2 + 2 + 3 over 8, that's going to give me this particular meter with the actual 2 + 2 + 3. If I wanted this to be 7/8 but have that note grouping, you type this a slightly different way with the square brackets. So left square bracket 2 + 2 + 3, right square bracket over 8, and it will add what's in the square bracket 7/8, but it will also make sure that the beams are properly set to the 2 + 2 + 3 division, just like that. There's other things you can do here. For example, you can do Shift M, let's say 6/8 space plus 3/4, and that will give you an alternating time signature, and this will indeed give you the proper notes. If I do this right, and you'll see that you'll have 6/8 and then 3/4 and then 6/8 and 3/4, 6/8 and 3/4, etc. going forward. This was always kind of a pain in the neck in Finale because you had to add this time signature, make sure it was 6/8 though, and then this was a hidden 3/4, this was a hidden 6/8, hidden 3/4, etc., etc. It's nice in Dorico that you just put that there and it knows that every other bar is 3/4 and 6/8. The other thing I want to point out is pickup measures. You can do the pickup bars in the panel over here, but if you want a pickup bar, Shift M, type the meter 4/4, and then without spaces a comma, and then the next number that you put in is going to be the pickup. So if you want a single quarter note pickup, just type 1. You can even do 1.5 to give you a 1.5 beat pickup. So that's how you do pickups. And again, all of this information is in that popover reference. So, consult that as you're going, especially as you're first learning, so that you can really learn these popover shortcuts. The next one down is the tempo tool, and there's a whole bunch of options here for absolute tempo changes. It's going to give you a bunch of preset words that you can use with this nice little filter, so you can filter out the super slow ones and the super fast ones if you need to. There are gradual tempo changes like RAL and Excel, relative tempo changes that you can reset tempo changes. There's a bunch of different categories here, and then you can also do tempo equations. Again, you can just choose what you want. So if you want a quarter note equals half, just do it here and then press this button and it will get added over there. But again, you can just type what you need in the tempo popover, which is Shift T. And with this one, you can literally type anything. So I could type really fast and press return, and that's my tempo, right? I can also type really fast space Q equals 185, right? And I'll get that. There's a lot you can do here. You can type whatever you want, basically. And what's interesting is in the properties panel, Command 8 to pull up the bottom panel here, there are a bunch of options. So if you wanted to parenthesize it, you can do that. If you want to make it approximate, there's different versions of how the approximate is shown. You can deselect all these things so you're not showing the 85, 185, etc. The other thing I want to point out about that specifically is that if I were to undo that and actually do that one more time really fast, initially it's just going to give you whatever tempo, 72. But if you really do need a tempo, you can actually set it in the property panels to 185. And even though it's not showing in the score of the parts, it is going to play back at 185. And even with that selected, you can then actually add the metronome mark later just in the properties panels. You can change the beat unit if you made a mistake there. Lots of things you can do with the property panel for tempo marks specifically. The other thing I want to mention about some of the tempo marks, if I can just add some notes in real quick. Incidentally, really nice shortcut, select notes and press R key and it will repeat over and over again for you, is that some of the tempo markings are range bound like the gradual tempo changes. So if I select a bunch of notes and I can go Shift T, I can type RIT period and get a RIT with a line. And this is the type of item that can be expanded or contracted with the Option Shift left and right arrows as needed. So some of these gradual tempo changes, or all of these gradual tempo changes, are going to have this type of feature to it. The immediate tempo changes are just going to be a single item. So the next tool down is the Dynamics panel tool, and that has the popover shortcut of Shift D. Let me just get over to a spot in the first movement here. And again, it works the same way. Just select an item, choose a marking if you want, or use the popover Shift D and just type it. So F for forte, right? If I wanted mezzo forte, MF, easy enough. You can also add gradual dynamics, whether or not it's the word or the hairpin. So Shift D and the angled left bracket there to give you the crescendo, Shift D, the other one to give you the decrescendo. And what's nice about the hairpins specifically is that you actually can bypass the popover. So simply Shift angled bracket will give you the decrescendo or crescendo hairpin, which is nice. Dynamics can also have a range. So if you select multiple notes here, and you can combine them too. So Shift D, P, crescendo, right, will give you all of that in one go. It can be even more complicated than that. Shift D, P, crescendo, forte. And note that when you do these with the immediate dynamic at the very end, that immediate dynamic is going to go on the note after the last piece of the selection. So this D is the last, or sorry, that's an E in alto clef. This E is the last thing selected. That forte marking is going to go on the F sharp over there. And it can get even more complicated. Shift D, we can do, let's see, P, crescendo to forte, decrescendo to mezzo piano, for example, right? And it will add all of that in one go. And Dorico's going to sort of take a guess as to where that midpoint is, and it just happens to be between these two notes. So if you want to slide it, you can always just drag them around and put them wherever you need. The other thing that's nice about the dynamic popover, and actually all of these popovers, but the dynamic specifically, is that if you select a bunch of staves and add a dynamic, it's going to put it everywhere in the correct spot. So in the case of the vocal staff, the dynamics are always going to appear above, so it's going to place that dynamic above. It's going to be below the note for the viola. And in the case of the piano part here, it's actually putting it under the note, because generally you wouldn't put dynamics under arrest, although in this particular case it's okay because there's notes in the left hand, but in most cases it's going to put that dynamic in the appropriate place, and you can select as many staves as you want. And then let me just quickly go through some of these others because I think you get the idea. The next one down is the Ornaments panel, and there's a bunch of different ornaments that you can add. Note that the arpeggios are also in the Ornaments panel. This has the popover shortcut Shift-O. Now this is one where honestly I don't have a ton of these memorized. I mean, I know what the trill is, TR. That'll give me the trill, and the trill is another one that can be expanded or shrunk. I know what the arpeggio is Shift-O-A-R-P to add an arpeggio. And again, really easy in Dorico to add it to a whole bunch of notes just like that. But other than that, I mean, I don't use ornaments all that often. So if I needed one of these Baroque ornaments, I would probably go in here and try and find the one that I need and just click it in. So, you don't have to exclusively use the panel. You don't have to exclusively use the popovers. It's certainly fine to use a mixture of everything. The next panel here is the repeats and tremolos, and note that the tremolos are part of the same system. And I guess technically a tremolo is a repeated note, so yeah, that kind of makes sense. But you have your endings, your repeat jumps. There's also things with rhythmic slashes, bar repeats, and numbered bars. I'm not going to get too much into that, but yeah, the tremolos are here. And the shortcut for this is Shift-R, and if I wanted the 3/ tremolo, it's just Shift-R. 3 slashes, 2 slashes, or 4 slashes, however many you need. And in this particular panel, this button here will actually turn the tremolos off if you need to. The next panel down is the bars and bar lines panel, and I'll just go over to that new movement real quick for this. There's a couple features here that I think are worth pointing out. One is that if you need to add measures, you use this popover and just select anywhere, Shift B, and just type plus, 15 to add 15 measures, and that will add 15 measures. Or you can do Shift B minus 15 to delete 15 measures. You can also see that this is where the bar lines will get added. So if you want a double bar line right here, you can of course select it there. Or you can do Shift B double pipe to add the double bar line. This is also where the repeats are added, so I can do Shift B pipe to get the right bar line, and if I want the left bar line, I think I can do it there actually. Pipe yep, and I would get the repeat there. So bar lines, bars, adding bars, deleting bars, all that stuff is in the bar and bar line panel. Oh, and one other nifty trick about this particular one is that if you type Shift B trim, that will actually delete all of the measures to the end of the flow, so that whatever you had at the end will be the end of the flow. That's really handy because then you don't have to figure out, wait, how many measures am I deleting there? Just Shift B TRIM to trim. The next panel and popover is the holds and pauses, and this has the popover shortcut Shift H. This is where you're going to find your fermatas and your caesuras and everything. So the one that you're probably going to use the most is the fermata. So Shift H, F-E-R is the fermata. And very nicely, Dorico will add that fermata to all of the parts, as well it should, because you just usually don't want to have a fermata in one part and not the others. There's ways that you can hide these if you really need to, but 99% of the time, this is a good thing. You want your fermatas showing up everywhere. Let me go back to that first movement. We'll talk about the next panel and popover, which is the playing techniques panel and popover. And in this particular panel, there is a ton of options, and they're all categorized by different instruments. There's some common ones, then there's ones for wind instruments, brass instruments, unpitched percussion, pitched, keyboard, choral, strings, guitar, and there's even a harp pedal thing where you can actually build harp pedal diagrams, which is super useful if you're writing a harp part. Note that there's like graphics and text, and you can certainly choose either from these panels if you want, or this particular popover does have some interesting feature to it. So if I do Shift P for the playing technique popover, what's going to happen with this popover specifically is that when you start typing, you're going to get a list of everything that it could possibly be, and it will narrow down as you continue. So A-R, and then you're going to end up with arco, and then just select it from the list and press return to add the arco there. If you need pits, Shift P, P-I, and that's usually all you need to get to the pizzicato, right? Other things like up bow, right? Shift U-P to get up bow. This is not going to give you the up bow text. It's actually going to give you the up bow marking. But with the playing technique specifically, again, you can use the popovers for the really common ones, or you can definitely just go in here and select what you need. And what's nice in this particular panel is that there is a plus button here. So this makes it easy to actually add playing techniques if you need to. If there's something in the string section that you that's not here that you really need, just press the plus button and it will take you to the Edit Playing Techniques Designer. And now I'm adding a brand new technique. I can decide if it's a text or a glyph. I can change what the text is, etc. Do things with continuations if I want the lines, etc. So yeah, there's definitely a lot you can customize in these playing techniques. And some of these playing techniques are range bound. The pedal marking is a good example. So I do Shift P and start typing pedal. That's going to give me this pedal marking with a line. And again, because it's a line type of item, it can be extended or shortened with those options, Shift left and right arrow shortcuts, right? And then there are some popovers for things that don't exist in the panels. So let's talk about some of those, starting with the lyrics popover. So the lyrics popover is easy, Shift L, and you get the lyrics popover. And there's something that I want to point out about this particular popover, actually in all popovers, but in Dorico 6, they added the feature where you can actually move these popovers. So there's like 3 little dots over here. You can actually take this popover and move it. And I always thought it was weird that the lyrics popover went above the staff because the lyrics eventually end up below the staff, but you can absolutely move that to wherever you need. And that lyrics popover, whenever you go into it, will always be at that location. And lyrics work similar in Dorico as they do in Finale. You just start typing the lyrics, so you can type words, and then spacebar will move to the next note. If that's a slurred note, just press spacebar again, and you can type the next words, spacebar, spacebar. If you need a hyphen, it's the same thing. Just type the first syllable, hyphen, type the second syllable, spacebar, etc. More words, etc. One difference here between Dorico and Finale is that if there's a rest, the spacebar will skip over the rest, which is actually kind of nice because in Finale, it's very easy to get your lyrics off by 1, and then all of a sudden you've got lyrics on a rest, and it's kind of a mess to clean up. But Dorico kind of intelligently skips over that rest. Although, interestingly, if you select the rest, you can still add a word on the rest if you really need to. It's also easy to add a second verse. Shift L, you have a spin box for the verses here. So if I select 2, now I'm in the verse 2 lyrics, and they will get placed below. There's also this option here, this little button, and you can see that it's pointing down, meaning that the lyrics are going to go below the staff, but you can actually put the words above the staff as well. So that's actually a nice little feature too. So that's the lyrics popover. Let's talk about the next one, which would be the chords popover. So the chords popover is Shift Q, and this is where you're going to be able to enter chords, and it's sort of the same idea. You just type whatever you need. So this is, let's say, D over F sharp, and when you press spacebar, it's going to go to the next beat, but the arrow keys will move by the rhythmic grid. I think I have it at 16th notes right now, so you can see that my arrow is going to move where I need it, and then I can type a new chord, D7, etc. This is going to be C minor 7. This is going to be F7. Now, chords in Dorico, there's a lot going on. First of all, the first thing you need to know is that chords are fundamentally considered system items, which means that these chords, they're only appearing on the piano part now, but there are ways to actually, in setup mode, actually, to set these so that they appear somewhere else. In the alto part, I can actually show this and the chords will show up. And these chords will be dynamic. So if I change the chords here, D9, it will change the chords everywhere. Now, of course, this does have the feature here where you can have these independent. So I could type 13, option, return, and now I can have different chords on both of these staffs. But there's a lot of flexibility and a lot of options here in terms of how these are showing. I'm not going to get too much into the details of that because it will get quite involved, and there's a few videos I'm going to point you to in a second. The other thing I want to talk about with chords is that, you know, in Finale, you have that chord suffix library. So if you, let's just type a chord here, D7, and we can go in here, and we can go into here, and go select the suffix. you're probably familiar with this chord suffix selection dialog box. And the way that this works in Finale is that there's a set number of possible suffixes that exist in this window. Now, the default file is 177 of them, which is quite a lot. So there's a lot to choose from. But you're basically stuck with these unless you add more or change. You can change these, obviously. But these are the suffixes that you have. Dorico doesn't quite work like that. Dorico, the suffixes in Dorico, it's more accurate to say that there's a library of suffix design parameters versus a library of actual suffixes, because in Dorico it considers, you know, a chord like diminished, D, D-I-M, it considers that the same as D with the circle. It's the same chord. In Finale, that's two different suffixes, right? In Dorico, it's the same chord just displayed in a different way. And the way that it displays these chords is in the engraving options under the chord symbols. You have the option to choose how Dorico is displaying these chords, right? So here's your options for major. If you want your minor chords to be FM or MIN or the minus symbol, you select it here, and it does that for every minor chord in the file. Same thing with minor 7, with diminished, right? You have the options here to choose which one you want. And Dorico is going to initially set these all in one particular way. And chord symbols, I know it's a very controversial topic sometimes. People are very adamant that the diminished 7 chord really should look like that versus this, you know what I mean? So it just had to choose one way or another to do that. But you can always go in here and change these to look how you want. And there is a ton of options. I'm just going to quickly scroll so you can kind of get the idea of the scope of this, how exhaustive this list is. And if you do things regularly with chord symbols, I really suggest, before you even get too far, is to come into this window and just go through every single option and set these the way that you want them to be, and just, you know, work with that. There are ways, especially now in version 6, where you can customize these symbols. You can change the design elements. You can add custom suffixes that maybe Dorico doesn't initially recognize. But it gets a little bit deeper into the weeds, and I don't want to get too much into that right now. But I will send you to 2 videos in particular, one by John Barron, which explores some of the ways that you can add chord symbols and work with chord symbols just generally. And there's another great video by David Larsen that was done more recently in version 6, where he's taking you through all of the ways that you can edit the chords and the chord symbols and the chord symbol kerning pairs dialog box, and how you can manipulate the chords to look exactly the way that you want them to, with the right fonts, with the right design, etc. So it does get a little bit into the weeds. I don't want to get too much into that right now, but I will say that you really should check out those videos. One thing that I forgot to mention about the chords is that when you add chords, you can type them. You can also just play them on a MIDI keyboard. And if I played that right, I just played a D7 chord and it appeared. So that's a nice little feature of the chord entry mode as well. There's another popover that I want to call your attention to called the Note Tools Popover, and that's triggered with Shift-I. And this is an amazing popover. This is going to allow you to add intervals. It's going to allow you to transpose. You can change scales. There's a ton of stuff you can do. And actually, I'm going to refer to the popover reference again for the Note Tools popover. It's going to show you how to type the intervals themselves just with letters or M's, capital, lowercase, P's for perfect, etc. And then it's going to show you what you can do. You can add intervals above, intervals below. You can transpose notes with a T or a T minus. There's things you can do with inversions, reversals, rotations. So you can rotate a chord upwards or downwards, repetitions, pitch mappings. So if you want all of your E flats in a passage to be E naturals, you can do that. Scale mapping, so you can select a series of notes and change them to Lydian. I mean, this is an incredible popover, Shift-I, and just a quick demonstration of how this works. So I've got this engaged here. I press 3 and I've added a third. I can do T3 and it will transpose a third. I can be more specific, like TM3, and it will transpose a minor third exactly. I could add more intervals. I could do, let's see, M3, comma, P5 to add a minor third and a perfect fifth above that and get chords. It is a super cool and useful popover. And I would say that it's sort of basically replacing a bunch of plugins in Finale. If you're familiar with the JW Tools Staff Polyphony plugin or the Canonic Utilities, There's one in TG Tools called Replace Pitches. There's a couple others. I mean, certainly a dozen or so of the RGP Lewis individual scripts it's replacing. So that one popover alone is replacing like at least a half dozen plugins in Finale just natively. So it's an incredible tool. And I'm going to send you to another video by Ernesto Agguire, who detailed this popover. And he titled the video "The Most Powerful Popover in Dorico." And I kind of agree with him in a lot of ways. It really is like the plugin popover, as it were. So that's Shift-I, the Note Tools popover. And Dorico also has a text popover, which is just Shift-X for text. And you get a different type of popover. You're going to get some options for stylizing the text, and you can literally type anything that you want here, and it doesn't necessarily have any playback functionality. It's just text that you're going to add. This popover behaves differently because pressing return will actually get you to a second line. So in order to, accept the popover, you actually press the escape key and you'll get out of the popover, and then Shift X will get you to editing it again, or double click. And you can do things with the typeface. You can change the paragraph style. You can change the size. You can actually change the font, a bunch of other options that you have here for formatting this particular text. And once you have anything selected here, the F key will flip it to the other side if you need it to go below instead of above. So that's Shift X for just basically any miscellaneous text that you want to add on a staff. But there's also system text, which is Shift Option X, and you get the same exact type of popover, but this is now system text, which means that when you add this, it's going to go to where system text goes, which generally is at the top of the staff, and it will appear on all of the parts in the part layouts themselves. So it's a difference between Shift X and Shift Option X to get staff text versus system text. And that's sort of the equivalent in Finale in the expression tool. Some of these items are staff specific, like the dynamics, right? And others, like the tempo markings, are system text. And if you're familiar with how this works in the category designer, the system text will have this score list, and the individual staff text won't have that score list because they're only going to that particular staff. Anyway, that's sort of the equivalent in Dorico. So that's Shift X and Shift Option X. And just very quickly, I'm not going to go through much about this, but Shift F is going to give you the fingering popover. Shift G is going to give you the figured bass popover. Again, check out the popover guide for the specific language about how to type these things. And Shift U is going to give you the cues popover, which is a really cool and unique feature of Dorico that allows you to cue one instrument and another instrument that's resting in the part only. I'm hoping to cover this a little bit more in depth later, so I'm going to skip over it quickly right now, but that's Shift U is for cues. And then there's one more, Shift 0 is actually the MIDI trigger popover. You can actually type something like C0, and that will add C to this note. So when it plays back, it's going to play the A, but it's also going to play the C0. This is useful if you're using a particular VST that uses key switches and there's no other way to trigger an articulation or something. So that MIDI trigger popover Shift 0 could be useful for stuff like that. So that's the panel and the popovers. There's one other thing I want to talk about in this video really quickly, which is the properties panel here. Just about a couple of things. First of all, the properties panel, if you have something selected, you're going to have properties that are relevant to that particular item. So in this case, I have a note selected, and I have options for notes and rest and beamings and ties and stuff like that. If I have a chord selected, I'm going to get options for chord symbols. If I have a slur selected, I'm going to have different options for that particular slur. So whatever you have selected, those properties are going to become available. But one thing I really want to make clear about this is the option here, set local properties locally or globally. This is really important because when you have this set to locally, what happens is that any property that you change here is only going to be changed on the layout that you're looking at, in this case, the full score. So if I change my accidentals to show round brackets with locally selected, when I go to that part, there's that A still selected. You will not see that accidental bracketed. However, if I undo that and change this to globally and do the same thing, now when I go to that part, you will see that. So it's really important when you're working with the properties panel to be aware of how this option is set. And generally, when you're working in the score initially, you're probably going to want to have this set globally because you're going to want the changes that you're making appear in both the score and the parts. Later on, when you're making individual changes in the parts, especially in engrave mode, you might want to change the properties scope to locally so that the small changes that you're making in engrave mode are only going to apply to the part. And incidentally, the properties are going to be different between write mode and engrave mode. So I see a bunch of properties for the note in write mode. I switch to engrave mode. It's going to be slightly different. Some of them are going to be the same, but there's going to be more in engrave mode, and they're going to do different things related to design versus related to things that are actually about the thing itself. So that's all I wanted to say about the properties panel. Just make sure that as you're using this, you're really aware of how this local properties scope is set. All right, so I think that's all I want to say here. I know I covered a lot. I covered a lot of the panels and the popovers and everything. Hopefully this has been helpful. And in the next couple of videos, I'm gonna cover engrave mode. So I'm looking forward to that. There's a lot to cover. So thanks for watching, and I will see you soon on the next one.